I think that my poetry is more Midwest. It's middle America. I grew up in a working class family in Indiana. My parents worked very hard, and their saying was always that hard work and education was the key to a successful future. And they were very serious about that. And being one of 6 children, we all had the opportunity to get off to college and so forth. And parents worked very hard to make that happen. And I think that's my generation. Not only is it geographically in consonance with the Midwest, but also I think you'll find that that it's generational. I think my poetry talks to 2 generations, my generation and my parents' generation. And I think the reason for that is that my generation, I feel, was a little special. You know, we were the Vietnam generation. We went off and fought in war, in which I did serve in Vietnam as a small unit commander. And also my parents' generation, because they were the generation who said, go out and work hard and get an education. And that was the key. And they did whatever was necessary to see that their kids got that. And I think that's the real key. And so what I try to do in my poetry is to talk not only to my generation, for my generation, but also as somewhat as a tribute to my parents' generation, because I think that everyone who grew up in my generation had the opportunities that were given by their parents, you know, and it's somewhat different today. My writing started inspiration from my mom. My mom just loved poetry. I can remember back when I was about 4 years old, you know, my mom used to be very active in the church, and we had Easter programs. And so I had an Easter poem I had to learn. And so that was my first attempt at reciting poetry. And it wasn't long, a couple of years later, a good friend of mine was killed in an automobile accident at a very young age. I was probably around 6 years old. And so my mom encouraged me to do the poem Crossing the Bar by Alfred Lord Tennyson. And since that time, I learned it, and I've never forgotten it, and since that time, I've always enjoyed it. So I've always done a little writing here and there, and I've encouragement to quite a few people. They said, hey, you know, why don't you become more serious? And so I did. And that's where my writing started. Well, the title, As Autumn Approaches. Autumn for me has been a watershed in my life. It seems like everything that happened to me happened in August. I went overseas in August. I went to Vietnam in autumn of life. And when autumn approaches, it seems that a lot of things happen. Even back when you're first starting school, you know, it happens in autumn, the start of school. It seems to be a watershed. In young life, it's more of a rebirth. People talk about spring and so forth, but autumn, you meet new friends. You start to notice things around you, that gradual change, like life. Things mature, the leaves change. And as autumn approaches, we're talking about midlife, that watershed, when it seems okay to look back as well as look forward. And it's a time to reflect. In most cases, autumn comes for most people more at the age in their 40s, you know. They're starting to reach the autumn of life, that time when they really face their mortality. But for most people who went to war, their autumn came early. And the reason their autumn came early is that autumn is a time that I feel we face mortality. We understand that we are mortal and that, you know, tomorrow is not promised. And for those who went off to war like I did, I think that's the first time you grow up and you face the mortality of life. Because most of the guys were just like you. You talked, your intercourse thoughts, and you talked about life. And there was no thought about dying. And suddenly, some die. And because they die, you realize if it could happen to them, it can happen to you. And so, as autumn approaches, it approached twice for me. It happened to me in Vietnam because it gave me a time to reflect. And autumn is a time for reflection. But as I grow older, when I reach my 40s, suddenly, every day, I take time to reflect. In my book, I dedicated the book to a young man. And his name is Danny Rosen. He was a young fellow, age 19, from a rural community in Illinois, Breeze. And to me, he was typical of those that went to Vietnam. He was also typical of those who did not return. He died about a year later in the rice paddies of Vietnam. And I chose to dedicate a poem to his mother. And his mom, I went and I visited his mom. And it was a privilege for me to visit with her and to share my last moments. He carried my radio in Vietnam, so we were tight. Everywhere I went, he went. And so I wrote a poem and I dedicated it to his mother and shared it with her. It's entitled About Those We Lost in Vietnam. We shall not see them marching in Veteran Day parades. Neither shall we see them standing correct at reveille nor retreat. But perhaps in thoughts, triggered by a protest song by Peter, Paul, and Mary, or a movie like Platoon, we can again hear them speak so confidently about tomorrow. And almost certainly their mirrored images from that black granite wall will again speak so lovingly about mothers and loved ones left waiting. Surely age and time will help our hearts to mend, but please, precious memories, do not fail us. And so I dedicated that not only to Danny, but to all of those young men who lost their lives in Vietnam. I'm from a generation that parents of my generation worked very hard. I was told many a day by my mother especially, because Dad was kind of in the background. You know, he'd work, but Mom ruled the roost. And Mom would say, you've got to work hard and get your education. That's the only way to the future. And I am of that generation. And in my collection of poetry, I try to address two generations. One generation was my generation of the Vietnam War, the generation of the dissidents, but also as a tribute to my parents' generation. Because I don't care what working class family you grew up in when I was growing up, parents took the responsibility. Families had the responsibilities for hard work to make sure that the kids had it a little better than they had it. And that was the thing. It didn't matter what social background, what ethnic background. Parents of our generation, they worked hard. They sacrificed. And my mom, she was my real inspiration. She told me, that education, hard work, and she always said, right, son, right. And I'm just sorry that she's not here to share this with me. I lost my mom back in a few years back, but she always encouraged me to write, to go forward. And so I'll start off with a poem that I basically dedicated to my mom. Not only is this dedicated to my mother, but it's also dedicated to the mothers of my generation. And it's entitled, Ode to a Loving Mother. Mother, sweet mother, how right you were, that if I lived long enough, I would find that all the dreams that parents dream for themselves mean so much less now that we have the children in mind. Mother, sweet mother, how right you were, that if I lived long enough, I would learn that that carefree spirit of youth starts so rapidly to fade as the hair takes a graying turn. Mother, sweet mother, how right you were, that if I've lived long enough, the years would go much too fast, that parenting demands and difficult labors of love are the dreams that really last. Mother, sweet mother, how right you were, that if I live long enough, that I would often pray that I could wake you from your peaceful rest for a mother's wisdom to guide me along life's way. Mother, sweet mother, how right you were, that as I watch one by one to eternity your generation pass, that many hopes were dreams and memories would fade, but in each newborn's baby's cry, maternal wisdom will forever last. And like I say, that was not only for my mother, but the mothers of her generation. And I have to give my sister credit, since we lost my mom. In the African-American families, it's traditional that the oldest sister step right in. And she's a surrogate mom, you know. She'll never admit it, but she is. And what she says goes. You know, we'll argue with her like we always did growing up, you know. But she basically runs the family, you know. She makes sure that we all do what we have to do still. And I have to thank her for it. See, I get a chance to thank her publicly, you know. And it's amazing that I see so much of what we grew up learning now starting to come back. You know, people talking about how the world is today, you know, how rough things are, how violent the world is. But I think there's a blessing in these tough times, and that is that people are starting to go back to the old values. They're starting to look back. They're starting to say, wait a minute, you know, there's something wrong, that we have to go back and start to do things, you know, for ourselves. And I think today that the things we took for granted, you know, we took for granted that, wow, you know, our kids were going to have it better than we did, you know, that the subsequent generations, you know, the quality of life was going to improve. And suddenly, there's concern that maybe our kids won't have it better than we had it, you know. And so we try to express that. We find that we are doing a lot more looking back. And I think the more we look back, I think we'll find guidance for the future. And I hope that in my poems that I relate that, you know, that, hey, you know, things were a little simpler then. I can think back of a time of turbulence in this country. We hear a lot about the 60s. This year we celebrated, and I don't know if you say celebrate it, I think we took time to remember Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy. And it takes you back, you know, 25 years ago, 1968. We lost both of those great leaders. And they were leaders of our generation. They were leaders who spoke up. They were vanguards. They were dissidents. I think we had a whole generation of dissidents. And we think about those turbulent times, and I think about the year 1969. For me, it was a somewhat different year, since most of it I spent in the rice paddies of Vietnam. But in '69, a lot of things happened in this country. And I wrote a poem entitled That in '69. That in '69, a real difference we could make as an unpopular war and protest grew. with the innocence of a nation at stake. Martin and Bobby a year earlier caused our souls to awake because it seems they already knew that in '69 a real difference we could make. Many went to war for their parents' sake. Others to Canada like wild geese they flew with the innocence of a nation at stake. Vietnam did this country's foundation shake as the growing winds of protest blew, that in '69 a real difference we could make. Deaths now too numerous for even governments to fake. Patriotism no longer an effective glue, with the innocence of a nation at stake. A future now proclaimed used to take, maybe hopes and dreams can begin anew, that in '69 a real difference we can make, with the innocence of a nation at stake. I was inspired by was childhood a great place to be a kid. I never forget the day my youngest daughter came home from school. I guess she was, at that time, she was probably first grade. And she came home and she said, and she was telling me about all these kids that she had met, you know, all these new friends. And then I thought about it. And I thought about it, what it would be like to be that age again and how it was when I was that age, you know. And I thought about, you know, a great place to be a kid, you know, when friends were everyone we knew. And that's where basically the poem, A Great Place to Be a Kid. And growing up, I think in those times were simpler. And I think that the advantage that Lincoln gives us is that we can still enjoy those same simpler times that they can't enjoy back in my hometown in Gary, Indiana. You know, steel town, which is basically manufacturing, steel manufacturing has been on the decline. Unemployment is high and so forth. And so we're lucky. We're blessed here in Lincoln that we can still enjoy that same type childhood. And so therefore, you know, childhood, a great place to be a kid, can be enjoyed, I think, by people in Nebraska because the children can still have that childhood. To have childhood over again, a great place to be a kid. And when you think about a great place to be a kid, I have to appreciate what we have here in Lincoln. What we have here in Lincoln is the same type of neighborhood, same type of community most of us grew up in. That we're not overrun with crime, we're not overrun with poverty. And so the kids here still have an opportunity to know what a great place childhood is. And I'll share with you childhood, a great place to be a kid. What a great place to be a kid when now was our only yesterday. When leaves had so many colors we really couldn't name them all, and no worries got in our way. What a great place to be a kid when friends were everyone we knew. When snow brought only thoughts of building forts for friendly snowball fights, and all our skies were blue. What a great place to be a kid when victory came simply from the try. When all the movies were great and the only emotional tears we shed were when the good guys died. What a great place to be a kid when our parents were right on time. When they would soothe our hurt, talk away our pain, and gently kiss worry from our mind. What a great place to be a kid when time so slow to pass, when all dreams seemed sure with hopes just as certain, and all we knew would forever last. Wasn't it great, childhood? I wrote that for my younger daughter. And of course, you know, I have two daughters, and you know how civil rivalry, even though she's the oldest. But this was a little different because at that time I had a daughter who had gone through puberty, going into junior high school, and decisions are very difficult to make. You want to give them the freedom to run, but you also want to channel them in a way they should go. And so you have these adult conversations with your kids and adolescents, and it's difficult. For me, my first one especially, it was very difficult. You know, we talk about how great we're going to do when it's time for us, but it's very difficult when they reach that adolescence, as those of my generation now know. And so I dedicated and wrote this poem for my daughter, Sarah, and it's entitled Undecided. To run with a wanton abandon, or to walk at a measured pace. To flow with life's tide of uncertainty, or to stride hard with the wind at your face. To race like the heart of a captured sparrow, or to glide majestically like the eagle at flight. To stand fast apart in the noonday sun, or to be hid in numbers, or by the cloak of the darkest night. The mountain at the distance shows much clearer. The dreamer, the painter, can pinpoint each valley and each curve. But only the climber knows the pure untested beauty and the lessons in life that it serves. And that was written for my daughter that was going into junior high. And she had all these decisions to make. And as you know, they're very difficult for parents to say, hey, do it this way or do it that way. But at the same time, you know, when we gave those contrasts, when we talked about to run with a wanton abandon or to walk at a measured pace, to flow with life's tide of uncertainty or to stride hard with the wind at your face. But we talk about these contrasting, but then when we get down to the end, we don't want to stifle. We want to say, hey, be the climber. You can stand back and analyze and so forth. You can dream about it, like the dreamer. Or you can paint it like the artist. But only the climber knows the beauty of life. And so I was encouraging her at the same time to get out and taste life. One of the other poems that I'd like to share with you, and it's one that is a very, very difficult poem for me. And I had the biggest fight with my poetry instructor, Greg, about this poem. And it was something that he told me that I found very true. And that is that anything you write that goes out has to stand alone. You can't go with it and interpret it. It has to stand by itself. And it took me a long time to understand that. But when I have an opportunity to explain it, then I have to take this opportunity, absolutely. It's entitled, My Last Sharing, and I Wonder. And I'll take this opportunity to share it with you. It's unbelievable that as we go through life and we have to look at death, people die around us, people that we know, people that we love. And you can always recall the day you bury someone that you love. If the day was cloudy, if the day was bright, we can always picture those days. And it's amazing that when you look at that, we think about life, we think about mortality. But everything has a different meaning. The song that we listen to after that has a different meaning. The sky, the clouds, the sunshine, they seem all to amplify the feelings that we're feeling. My last sharing, and I wonder. So bright the day and so crisp the breeze, that I can touch the memories gone by. So clear the lyric and so dull the tone upon death, and I wonder why. So gentle the rain and so comforting the clouds that I can snuggle with memories gone by. So vivid past joys and less matters what pain upon death, and I wonder why. So refreshing the wind and so dull and still the calm that I can hear the memories gone by. So vivid the reflections and dreams less clear upon death, and I wonder why. So less threatening the storms and less menacing the snows than when compared to times gone by. So reassuring as seasons change and less harsh nature's reign upon death, and suddenly it matters less why. Another poem that I think that again is generational and is Men at the Age of 45. Men at the Age of 45, I think, as we can almost dissect it or intersect it and look at it and say certain things happen as you cross that threshold. You know, most people say 40, but 40 you're still trying to run forward. And then when you reach 45, suddenly you say, hey, you know, it's okay to look back, you know? And I think as we go through that poem, we'll really enjoy that when we talk about what happens at the age of 45, not only for myself, but for most people, you know. It seems okay to look back. The other thing is that when you reach that age, even though there was some tolerance in youth, there was a lot of intolerance. And what you find as you grow older, you become more tolerant of others. And then as you reach an age, you find out that you try to encourage your children to be tolerant of others. And the other part of that really inspired me was as I look at my children and I look at my parents and I see their same smile, their same mannerisms, and suddenly I understand that I'm the link between the two, you know, as we look out. And we talk about that in the poem, Men at the Age of 45. So I think that's one that people seem to enjoy because it's easy to relate to, especially for the men. Men at the age of 45 cry more in silence, not with regrets, but in celebration of life. The intolerance of their youth now softened by a prolonged legacy of achievements and disappointments. It seems okay now to look back, to reflect on earlier times as they encourage their sons and daughters to be tolerant of others. And in the mannerisms of both parent and child, they find themselves the bridging link. Now with parents relegated to simply observing, and the final moldings of their children begun, moldings that will link future generations to the next. Fond memories of pain and sacrifice as the mosaic changes of life's autumn besets the family tree. I had a chance that not many people have. I had a chance to help my father on last year to celebrate his 80th birthday. And it's amazing as you grow older and have children of your own, and you say you're going to attempt to do it a little better than your parents did, even though you know it'll be very difficult. And you're going to tell Dad, this is what I think of this. I think you should have done this. But it's amazing. My generation learned respect for their parents. And that respect doesn't allow us to say the things that we say we're going to say. And it doesn't. Even though when we go in, we say, I'm going to tell him this. This is the time I'm going to tell him. But you never get around to it because the respect won't let you. Even though you've had numerous experiences, war and other experiences. And so I had opportunity to share with my dad his 80th birthday. And so I sat down after visiting him and came back home and wrote this poem entitled Talking to My Father on His 80th Birthday. I can't talk to him from a totally adult perspective. Although I've experienced war and am better than half his age, nor can the uncertainty and adolescence of my far distant youth be evident in my tone. If this conversation is to be more meaningful and fulfilling, it can't be mired like those most recent in unspoken words and memories long forgotten. If any time on this, his 80th birthday, as his coming winter chills my autumn days, can we speak just this once candidly about tomorrow? But his well-earned respect still blocks my path. It will have to be voiced in the deeds and accomplishments of my children, or in the candor and sincerity of our tear-soaked eyes. Thank you. I think that one of the poems that I'm probably most proud of is a poem that we had to write. It wasn't one that we chose to write. It was a poem we had to write. It's a poem written in sestina. And sestina is a discipline that we had to learn. And you only get 6 words. You get 6 N words, and that's it. But you have to come up with a 39-line poem that's coherent, but 6 N words. But not only do they get to end in those words, but they have to rotate among the poem. The first line in the first stanza becomes the second line in the second stanza. And it's a discipline that is tough. But oh, how good it feels once you do it. Regardless to how everyone else feels about it, you're proud of it, and you say, wow, I did it. And I did it. I wrote a sestina. What my sestina did is to look at my life from cradle through the current situation of parenthood. And so I'd entitle it Seasons of My Life in the Sestina. Stay away, oh blistering winter. You will cause my colors to fade. I have a few bold strokes of love and imaginings, now tempered by autumn shade. I have a few more reflections to paint. Thoughts once vivid grow increasingly faint. Thoughts of my first yesterdays are too faint, sprung from the soul of my first nurtured winter. They grew sharper, much too new to fade, too novice to be aware of early imaginings, filtered protectively by a parental shade, and much too young for life's picture to paint. In spring, my early youth, so vivid life's colors paint. Only old age and death seem distant and faint. Kindergarten melts the snows of my earliest winter, as mother's apron strings began to fade. Life filled with only simple, worthwhile imaginings, protected so totally by innocent shade. In late spring, puberty, like a corrosive acid, eats at innocent shade, and they begin to run together, life's colors paint, as once distinct borders grew perplexingly faint. No thoughts of life's first or final winners, although true innocence begins to eternally fade and contaminate once pure and wholesome imaginings. My early summer, void of John Lennon's imaginings, overshadowed and tempered by Vietnam shade, too blood red life's colors paint, cries for world peace at first much too faint, and for so many too soon life's final winner. Memories of pain and death too vivid to fade. Late summer, when childhood dreams so rapidly fade, and so does so many of my childhood imaginings as I spread for my children their protective parental shade. Responsibility now touches each hue of life's colors paint, and that once carefree spirit of youth grows increasingly faint. Soon autumn will usher in my final winter. Don't come too soon, my last blistering winter. Let first my old memories fade. I have a few last strokes of love and imaginings, but I like that one. Someone asked me to write a poem about see you later. And I wondered. I said, I'll attempt it if you'll tell me why. And they said that they had a good friend that is no longer with them. And they say they could never use the word goodbye. It was always, see you later. And they said, I've never heard anyone write a poem, see you later. And so I thought about it. And I thought about it. And I said I'd be just as candid as I could. And this is a very short selection, but I think it says something to all of us, that a lot of us don't want to face goodbyes, and so it is difficult. And so we do say, see you later. See you later, once so appropriate in that carefree, youthful way, so confident about our tomorrows, since blessed with yesterday. See you later avoids for us of just what growing old could cost, avoids worry about life's partings, no hints ever of mortal loss. See you later are the words still most spoken, even at times when we would really rather cry. Even now, after age has taught us, it could very well be our goodbye. And I'm going to end tonight with a selection. And basically what this selection says is talks about autumn. The autumn of life. And it's entitled On Autumn. And before I get to that selection, we think about certain things that happens as autumn approaches. As we look at the autumn of our lives, that watershed between looking back and still looking forward. And certain things that I thought were very apropos as autumn approaches. Early beginnings now seem more distant, while time passing picks up its pace as autumn approaches. Life's compulsories, once hated, become our fondest memories as autumn approaches. Fewer rushes to challenge, much more sincere goodbyes as autumn approaches. And the one that I think that we all share and think about the most, and that is Those hoped-for tomorrows are too soon our yesterdays as autumn approaches. And I'll share with you this one last selection entitled On Autumn. So very acute change the leaves, and yet so subtle the grass. So melancholy is life's thoughts, through the portals of autumn, all life must pass. So very crisp are the nights, and yet so mellow the day. So melancholy is life's spirit, that winter's death is just an autumn away. So abruptly cold winds start, and yet summer's games have failed to cease. So pensive now parents' dreams, their autumn, mid-solstice towards life's final peace.